King Offa was a powerful Anglo-Saxon king who ruled the kingdom of Mercia from 757 to 796. Mercia was one of the main Anglo-Saxon kingdoms in what is now central England. It was not until a century later that King Offa claimed kingship of the English. He was powerful enough to employ thousands of men to build a huge earth wall, the length of the Welsh border, to protect his kingdom from attack. The invaders came from three powerful Germanic tribes, the Saxons, Angles, and Jutes. The Jutes settled mainly along the south coast. The Angles settled in the east and also in the north, and the Saxons settled between the Jutes and the Angles. The Anglo-Saxons established a number of kingdoms, some of which still exist in country or regional names to this day. Essex, the East Saxons; Sussex, South Saxons; Wessex, West Saxons; Middlesex, probably a kingdom of Middle Saxons; East Anglia, East Angles. By the middle of the 7th century, the three largest kingdoms, those of Northumbria, Mercia, and Wessex, were the most powerful. King Offa was a powerful Anglo-Saxon king who ruled the kingdom of Mercia from 757 to 796. Mercia was one of the main Anglo-Saxon kingdoms in what is now central England. It was not until a century later that King Offa claimed kingship of the English. He was powerful enough to employ thousands of men to build a huge earth wall. The length of the Welsh border was to protect his kingdom from attacks. But although he was the most powerful king of his time, he did not control all of England. At that time, a king's power depends on the personal loyalty of his followers. After his death, the next king had to work to rebuild this personal feeling of loyalty. About government, the Anglo-Saxon lands were divided into several kingdoms, each ruled by a king. The king was the top ruler, responsible for protecting the kingdom, leading the army, and making important decisions. Kings were usually chosen from noble families. The Saxons created institutions which made the English state strong for the next 500 years. One of them was the King's Council, called the Witan. This institution was a formal body by the 10th century, and this group included important nobles and church leaders. The Witan helped the king make decisions about laws, taxes, and other important matters. It was not at all democratic, and the king could decide to ignore the Witan's advice, but he knew that it might be dangerous to do so, for the Witan's authority was based on its right to choose kings. Without it supporting, the king's own authority was in danger. About social classes, I can mention kings. Kings were the top rulers of the land. Each kingdom had its own king. They made the big decisions, led the army, and protected their kingdom. They had the most power and wealth. Earls were important nobles who were just below the king in status. They managed large areas of the kingdom for the king, enforced laws, collected taxes, and led local armies. Then peasants. Peasants were common people who worked the land. There were free peasants, ceorls, who owned or rented their own land and serfs who worked on land owned by nobles. They farmed, raised animals, and did various crafts. Finally, slaves. Slaves were at the bottom of society. They had no rights and were often forced to work without pay. Slaves could be prisoners of war or people who were sold into slavery. The Saxons divided the land into new administrative areas based on shires or counties. Shire is the Saxon word, county the Norman one. Over each shire was appointed a shire reeve, the king's local administrator. In time, his name became shortened to sheriff. Sheriffs were expected to collect taxes and fines due to the king, carry out justice in the king's shire court. Shire courts dealt with the most serious crimes, like murder, theft, and disputes over the ownership of land. Raised soldiers for the loyal army whenever they were needed. The Anglo-Saxons introduced a heavier plough which was better able to plough in long straight lines across the field. Ploughs are farming tools used to turn over the soil to prepare it for planting crops. Ploughs were essential for farming. They helped farmers to work the land more efficiently, which was important because most people were farmers who grew their own food. These fields would be used for planting spring crops, autumn crops, and also would be used as common lands for animals to feed on. This Anglo-Saxon pattern, which became more and more common, was the basis of English agriculture for 1,000 years until the 18th century. The church was very important in Anglo-Saxon society. It was the center of religious life and a place for community gatherings. The church had a lot of influence over people's lives, including education and moral guidance. They were made of wood and later on were rebuilt in stone. The villages were also reconstructed. Each house had probably only one room with a wooden floor with a pit beneath it. Each village had its lord. The word lords means loaf ward or bread keeper, while lady means loaf kneader or bread maker, a reminder that the basis of Saxon society was farming. The duty of the village head or lord was to protect the farm and its produce. Common animals included cows, sheep, pigs, chicken, and horses. Christianity was accepted by the Roman Emperor Constantine in the early 4th century AD. Constantine is famous for becoming the first Roman emperor to convert to Christianity. In 313 AD, he issued the Edict of Milan, which allowed Christians to practice their religion freely without persecution. This was a big change because before this, Christians were often persecuted. In the last 100 years of Roman government, Christianity became firmly established across Britain, both in Roman controlled areas and beyond. However, the Anglo-Saxons belonged to an older Germanic religion and they drove the Celts into the west and north. Pope Gregory I, also known as Gregory the Great, was the leader of the Roman Catholic Church from 590 to 604 AD. He was a very influential pope who worked to spread Christianity, improve the church, and help the poor. Gregory wanted to convert the Anglo-Saxon in England to Christianity, so he sent a mission to do this. In 597, he sent a monk, Augustine, to re-establish Christianity in England. He went to Canterbury, the capital of the King of Kent. He did so because the king's wife came from Europe and was already Christian. Augustine became the first Archbishop of Canterbury in 601. He was very successful, and several ruling families in England accepted Christianity. Bede was an English monk, historian, and scholar who lived from 673 to 735 AD. He is called the father of English history because of his important work documenting the history of England. Ecclesiastical History of the English People is the most famous book written by Bede. The title means the church history of the English people. The book tells the story of England, especially focusing on the spread of Christianity. It includes stories about kings, saints, and important events from the early 600 to Bede's time. This book is one of the best sources we have about early English history and the development of the Christian Church in England. The Church increased the power of the English state, establishing the monasteries, which were places of learning and education. The great king who ruled Wessex, Alfred, helped to establish a system of law to educate the people and to write down important matters. He started the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, the most important source, together with Bede's ecclesiastical history of the English people, for understanding the period. Towards the end of the 8th century, new raiders were tempted by Britain's wealth. These were the Vikings, a word which probably means either pirates or the people of the sea inlets, and they came from Norway and Denmark. They burned churches and monasteries along the east, north, and west coast of Britain and Ireland. In the map, we can see the Viking invasions and the areas they brought under their control. Here we can appreciate some Vikings' characteristics. They were known for being fearless sailors and fierce warriors. They had cool ships that could sail across rough seas. Vikings were also skilled traders and explorers. They had a strong sense of honor and loyalty to their families and leaders, and they valued bravery and strength in battle. Vikings also had a rich culture with their own gods, myths, and traditions. The Osberg Viking ship, made in about AD 800, was 21 meters long and carried about 35 men. These particular ships were used to invade Britain. It was an inspiration for the captain of the ship which was used to cross the Atlantic to America in 1893. Viking rule was recognized in the east and north of England. It was called the Danelaw. In the rest of the country, Alfred was recognized as king. During his struggle against the Danes, he had built walled settlements to keep them out. In 865, the Vikings invaded Britain. This time, they came to conquer and to settle. By 875, only King Alfred in the west of Wessex held out against the Vikings, who had already taken most of England. After some serious defeats, Alfred won a decisive battle in 878, and 8 years later he captured London. He was strong enough to make a treaty with Vikings. In 990, the Saxon king Ethelred decided to pay the Vikings to stay away by setting a tax on all his people called Danish money. This tax system would provide the money for armies. When Ethelred died, Canute, the leader of the Danish Vikings, controlled much of England because the Witan and everyone else feared disorder. Canute died in 1035 and his son died shortly after, in 1040. The Witan chose Edward, one of the Saxon elders' sons, to be king. Edward, known as the Confessor, was more interested in the church than in kingship. By the time Edward died, there was a church in almost every village. Edward only lived until 1066, when he died without an obvious heir. Edward had brought many Normans to his English court from France, particularly from the most powerful family of Wessex, the Godwinsons. So it was a Godwinson Harold whom the Witan chose to be the next king of England. Harold had already shown his bravery and ability. He had no royal blood, but he seemed a good choice for the throne of England. Harold's right to the English throne was challenged by Duke William of Normandy. In 1066, Harold had to march north into Yorkshire to defeat the Danes. No sooner had he defeated them than he learned that William had landed in England with an army. Harold thought he could beat them with the men who had done so well against the Danes. However, the Norman soldiers were better armed, better organized, and were mounted on horses. Harold was defeated and killed in battle near Hastings. William marched to London and was crowned King of England in Edward's new church of Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day, 1066.